So in front of me I have two of Canon's full-frame DSLR cameras, the 5D Mark III and the 6D Mark II. And these two may not be the most interesting cameras to talk about in 2019, but these have become extremely affordable in the recent months. The 6D Mark II when it first came out was about $2,000, and now you can get one either used or brand new for anywhere between $1,200 to $1,500. And the 5D Mark III, of course, is a professional camera that used to cost over $3,000, and now you can get one used for about the same price as the 6D Mark II, or sometimes even less if you look hard enough. I wasn't always a Canon shooter, and I bought my first 5D Mark III about a year and a half ago. It has been my workhorse and it has been my main travel camera, and I've taken a lot of great photos with it. The 6D Mark II I bought about 6 months ago, mainly to shoot videos for my YouTube channel. So although these two cameras are very similar in price nowadays, they are very different cameras. So if you're looking to buy one of these cameras, my guess is that you are probably already a somewhat experienced photographer, either looking for a first full-frame camera to upgrade to from your APS-C Canon camera, or maybe you're already a professional photographer who's maybe looking to buy a backup 5D Mark III or a 6D Mark II as a hybrid shooter. So I'm just going to go over some of the specs and also compare some of the physical differences between the hardwares, so hopefully you guys can form your own opinions on how you should spend your money. So here we go. The 5D Mark III has a 22.3 megapixel sensor, and the 6D Mark II has a 26.2 megapixel sensor. 22 versus 26, more megapixels always sound better, but based on my testing, I really didn't see any difference in sharpness. And if you actually take a look at the images, 22 versus 26, it's really not a huge difference at all. The native ISO on the 5D Mark III is 100 to 25,600. The 6D Mark II, it's 100 to 40,000. And the expanded ISO range are exactly the same on both cameras, from 50 to 102,000 and 400. The 5D Mark III is a much older camera, so it has an older processor, the Digic 5 Plus, and the 6D Mark II has a Digic 7 processor. Theoretically, that might mean better low light performance and also maybe slightly faster burst rates, but these two being completely different cameras, I don't think it means much at all. The maximum shutter speed on the 5D Mark III is 1/8,000th of a second, and on the 6D Mark II is 1/4,000th of a second. The faster shutter speed on the 5D Mark III might be useful if you're shooting wide open on a bright sunny day, but you can also always use a filter. It's not a big deal at all. And the still frame rate on these cameras, 6 frames per second on the 5D Mark III and 6.5 on the 6D Mark II. Here's 5D Mark III, 6D Mark II. They both sound about the same to me. Oh, and that also reminds me, the sound of the shutters are very different on these two cameras. It is much louder on the 5D Mark III. Let me see if you can hear it. And now the 6D Mark II. Again, 5D Mark III. Here is silent mode in 5D Mark III. And the 6D Mark II again. And the silent mode in 6D Mark II. As you can see, because the shutter on the 5D Mark III is a lot louder, the silent mode on the 5D Mark III makes a bigger difference. The 5D Mark III has 61 autofocus points, 41 of them being cross-type, and the 6D Mark II has 45 autofocus points, all of them being cross-type. Having more focus points spread out on the viewfinder is very useful for still photographers. A lot of people criticize the 6D Mark II's focusing system all being cramped in the middle, but not all beginners to mid-level photographers use all the different focusing points, especially for cameras like the 6D Mark II, which does not have the joystick to control the autofocus points like the 5D does. So you can always stick with the center autofocus points and focus and recompose, and it's not a big deal at all. It will just be slightly less accurate time to time. The viewfinder coverage is 100% on the 5D Mark III and 98% on the 6D Mark II. The maximum flash sync speed on the 5D Mark III is 1/200th of a second, and based on Canon website website, the maximum flash sync speed on the 60 Mark II is 1/160th of the second, but I have used the 60 Mark II at 1/200th of the second and it didn't really make a difference, so you might be able to get away with it. In terms of their video capabilities, the two of the biggest differences between these two cameras is that the 5D Mark III can only shoot up to 30 frames per second at 1080p and the 60 Mark II can shoot 60 frames per second at 1080p. Neither of these cameras do 4K, and there might be some differences between the codec and the compression, but based on my experience, I didn't see any meaningful difference whatsoever editing them and watching the footages. Although the image quality will be pretty much identical in most circumstances, in higher ISO, the 60 Mark II seems to perform a lot better. Also, while shooting video, 5D Mark III's ISO is limited to 12,800 in manual mode, and the 60 Mark II's footage at ISO 40,000 seems cleaner than the footage from the 5D Mark III at ISO 12,800. And the 60 Mark II also has Canon's great dual pixel autofocus, which is a great autofocusing system that tracks your face automatically while shooting video, and the 5D Mark III does not have that. Now let's take a look at some of the differences in the hardware. The 5D Mark III is a physically bigger and heavier camera. Its body weighs about 860 grams, while the 60 Mark II weighs 685 grams. When I grip a 5D Mark III on my hands, my pinky finger rests comfortably on the grip of the 5D Mark III, and the 60 Mark II being a slightly shorter camera, my finger usually sits below the camera grip. Perhaps the biggest difference between the two is the screen. The 5D Mark III has a 3.2-inch screen that's fixed onto the camera, and the 60 Mark II has a flip-out touchscreen which is slightly smaller at 3 inches, but the resolution are exactly the same. Another big difference, the 60 Mark II does not have a headphone jack. Also on the mode dial, the 5D Mark III has 3 custom settings while the 60 Mark II only has 2. On the 5D Mark III, you use the dedicated thumbstick to change the autofocus point. On the 60 Mark II, you have to use the D-pad, which can be a little less comfortable. Neither of these cameras have built-in flash, which might be surprising if you're upgrading from a smaller Canon camera, but the built-in flashes are usually pretty terrible anyway, so if you need one, just buy an external flash. The 60 Mark II has GPS, Wi-Fi, and NFC built in. The 5D Mark III lacks all of those things. The GPS might be useful for some people, especially if you travel a lot. It is very helpful to be able to pinpoint exact locations of your photos, but I also heard that the GPS can drain the battery in the camera quite quickly. And perhaps the second most important feature that is different on these two cameras, apart from the flip-out touchscreen, is the dual card slot on the 5D Mark III. On the 5D Mark III, you can record your images and videos onto a CF card or an SD card, or both at the same time as a backup, and the 60 Mark II has only one SD card slot. So if you're a professional photographer, especially wedding photographer, you might want to consider the 5D Mark III just for that reason alone. It's rare, but memory cards do fail, and imagine going back to your client 2 months after their wedding telling them that you don't have the photos because your memory card died. That might as well be the end of your career. So to summarize, which camera should you buy? I would say if you can only buy one camera to shoot photos and videos, I would say go for the 60 Mark II. Especially if you're planning on doing any sort of vlogging, the 60 Mark II is a great camera with the flip-out touchscreen. You know, the 60 Mark II was never really known for its image quality, but you know, neither was the 5D Mark III, but it's still being used by hundreds of thousands of professional photographers around the world, and I don't see them complaining about sharpness or dynamic range. So if you need one camera that can do both video and stills, I would say go for the 60 Mark II. And the 5D Mark III, if you only care about shooting still photography, I think the 5D Mark III will be a better option for you. It has more professional features like the dedicated thumbstick and also the dual card slot, so it'll teach you to shoot more like a professional photographer. So that's it for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope this is helpful, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.